about failure in this video. So most realtors end up failing or falling out of the business, quitting the business within just 3 years. The statistic shows that 80% of all real estate agents end up quitting the business, are no longer in the business just after 3 years. I mean, why is this? In this video, we're going to talk about exactly why you might fail in 2023 so that you can avoid failing in 2023. So make sure you stay tuned. What's up, everybody? My name is Henry Eisenstein. If you don't know who I am, I've been a part of over $400 million worth of real estate transactions, and I'm only 28 years old. And in this video, again, we're talking about how to avoid failure in 2023. So that means you can have a breakout killer year. I want this one to be a record breaker. So one thing I want to specifically break down for you in this video is that we're going to be talking a lot about different things that you do not do, right? Like you should not do. So in this video, we're going to be talking about specific things to avoid, right? Or specific things to make sure you are doing, right? And we're going to be talking about those mistakes. So the very first thing is you do not prospect enough. And by the way, the word enough is going to be stated a lot because what ends up happening is people, as an example for prospecting, which a lot of you probably knew I was going to say if you're watching this video, but what a lot of people say is like, well, I prospect. Well, you don't prospect enough, because I want to talk about what enough means. Because there's so many things in the world of sales that you can control. Matter of fact, I'm going to be putting out a video specifically on this, so make sure you guys check out the video when it comes out. But what I'm here to specifically state is that you're not prospecting enough. Now, what does enough mean? Enough basically stands out to be whatever your goal is, the translation into how many calls you need to be making. So if your goal is to be making $200,000 a year, as an example, the thing that a lot of people should do, right, you should do to make sure you avoid failing out of the business and not making any money, right, is actually track your data, right, which, you know, again, is going to be number 2 here, where it's like people don't track their data. So it's like when you're not calling enough, it's probably because you're not tracking the data here. When you're not tracking the data, it's kind of hard to know if you called enough to get the result you want. Because it's like if you want to make, again, $200,000 for the year, and you say, well, I just make calls every day, you actually probably don't know how many calls you need to be making. If you want to know how many calls you need to be making, you need to be tracking your data to see what your call to conversation ratio is, then what your conversation to lead ratio is, and then what your lead to appointment ratio is, and then what your appointment to contract ratio is, and then your contract to close ratio. That way you can reverse engineer it and say, okay, well, if I want to make 200 grand this year, that means I had to have signed enough contracts, which means I went on enough appointments, which means I set enough appointments, because you're going to have a conducted appointment set to conducted ratio. Then you're going to have a ratio between the amount of leads versus appointments you set. So you had to make sure you got enough leads, which means you had to make sure you have to have enough conversations from the amount of calls that you had, right? It all goes backwards. So unless you actually track the data and say, well, this is what my conversion ratios are, you don't know what enough calls is. So of course it might be very difficult to make 200 grand because you don't know how many conversations or calls you need to be making in order to make your, allotted amount of money, whatever your goal is. That's why it's important to track it. So 2023 needs to be all about tracking, which is point number 2. You're not tracking the data, right? So, because these go hand in hand, because if you're wondering how to make enough money, that means you probably need to know how many calls you need to be making, or how many appointments you need to set, or how many appointments you need to conduct, contracts, and all these kinds of things. You need to know that data. If you're getting massive value out of this video and you want to work with me personally, make sure you check out the first link in the description down below and schedule your free consultation with myself and my team. You need to know how many dollars, right, you're going to make per contract, right? What's your average commission check? You need to know these specific details so you know actually how many appointments you need to go on. So again, the big mistakes is you don't prospect enough, because some of you are prospecting, but you are not prospecting enough in order to achieve the result. And then the other caveat of not calling enough, you can even say calling for long enough, right? Because what ends up happening is that sometimes some of you watching this might be 6 months into the business and you're like, I want to make 100 grand this year. Well, I mean, listen, like if you're not calling for enough or long enough period of time, you can't compound. Especially if you haven't been calling enough people over enough of a period of a time, it's very hard to say that you prospected, right? Because just because you made a few calls today doesn't mean you really did what you were supposed to do. Hope that's making sense there. Not calling enough or for long enough. And then number 2 again is not tracking your data. So if you don't have a spreadsheet created, which is, you can even just have it as a Google Sheets, really, really simple stuff. That's what I use for all my sales teams, just a simple Google Sheets form. And then all you have to do is just fill it out with your information. Fill it out with the amount of calls you made, conversations you had, the amount of leads you generated, the amount of appointments set, the amount of appointments conducted, and the amount of contracts signed, right? And then obviously any contracts closed and the average commission amount, right? That's it, guys. Like track each one of those pieces of data every day. That's it. And when you do that, you're actually going to be able to then, over a period of time, which in the next 30, 60, 90 days, you're going to have some data and say, based on this amount of calls, I made this much money. And then now you can say like, well, okay, now just divide the amount of money you made by the amount of calls you made. You'll be like, oh wow, every call I made is worth 20 bucks, 50 bucks, 100 bucks, right? It's pretty cool, right? But if you don't track your data, it's really hard to know how much calls to make, right? You're just prospecting for the fun of it, essentially, right? You're winging it. I mean, that's essentially what it is when you're not tracking your data. So number 3 is you're not networking enough. Specifically, if you want to fail out of this business, just don't network specifically, right? If you want to fail out of this business specifically, just do not go out and meet new people. And a lot of realtors actually do this, right? They actually do not go out and meet new people actively. This is something that constantly and forever needs to happen in order to grow your business, because if you're not doing that, you're assuming that people will refer you. That just doesn't make any sense, because again, think about it. If you assume, what are you doing, right? So my point of saying this is a large majority of my income these days is because of my network. A large majority of the income comes from people who I have built relationships with, who want to do business with me and or refer me people to do business with, right? So if you're not avidly networking, you're not building that, professional partners list, as I like to call it, right? That is going to hinder your ability to earn, right? So again, if you don't want to make any money, make sure you're not networking. It will guarantee your failure. Every single week, just don't meet any new people. But if you want to succeed, you should be meeting at least 2 to 3 new people each and every single week. Now again, I'm not trying to say that you're going to do business with every single person you meet, but I am saying it is crucial to know that you can't do business with people you don't meet. Maybe you could do it by, via the phone, right? You could possibly build a relationship that way. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I am saying that you need, which is still an introduction to somebody, but you can't do business with somebody you don't know, right? You have to be introduced to somebody new, and whether that's a cold call or a networking thing, it doesn't have to be from another person, but if you're not avidly building the network to do business with more people, it's not gonna just happen for you. It's a fairly simple process, but if you do not network, if you do not add to your network, right, your sphere of influence, if you do not add to your database each and every single week, you're going to struggle as a real estate agent. So the next reason why most realtors fail in the real estate business is because they spend too much money. I want to be very clear. As a real estate agent, you really don't need a lot of stuff in order to make money. Let me explain. You really only need a few things to actually make money, actually need, right? I'm not talking about would like, need. Number 1, you need a phone, right? You need to have a phone. So a phone bill is going to be a little bit of your expenses. The only other thing that you're really going to absolutely 100% need is some type of CRM system. That's about it, and most companies offer one for free. I know EXP does, and again, I'm not here to pitch it, but again, if your company doesn't even offer a CRM, I mean, for God's sakes, I would probably find one that at least will offer you a CRM system. Now, those are the only 2 things you're ever going to need, period, need. Now, don't get me wrong. Would I recommend also having a dialing software where you can buy some leads, Mojo Dialer, Vulcan 7, or RedX, right, something like that, right? Along those lines, yes, right? So let's just even call it those 3 things. You need a phone, a CRM, and a dialer. That's it, guys. You don't need, all this other crazy stuff. So when it comes to spending money, often what happens is that agents will spend too much money on paid advertising, Zillow, Realtor.com, all these other different avenues of generating leads, whatever that is, right? They'll spend a lot of money there. They'll hire people and spend too much money on salaries and other costs like that. They'll pay too high a rent, right? You'll have an office for some reason, don't get me wrong, I believe in going to an office or working from home, but the point is, across the board, agents spend too much money. And if you want to be super successful in this business, right off the bat, wherever your current situation is currently, right, wherever you are now, you need to take a quick step back and analyze and be listen, if you're only making 40 grand a year, this might not be the right time to double down on your investing in Zillow leads. This might not be the right time to hire an assistant. This might not be the right time to rent space. This might not be the right time to take on all this extra cost. When in reality, you should be doubling down on the lead generation activities, right, like we talked about before, and tracking your metrics and making your calls, because those are the things that will actually lead to results. And you might be arguing with me Henry, what about signs and lock boxes and open house signs and these flags and that flag and your business cards and a website and all that stuff? Guys, I'm just gonna be honest, I use such little stuff these days, right? In the second a property goes under contract, I move a sign to the next property to list, right? And then the second that property's under contract, I move the sign. So I only have 10 signs, right? And they just get cycled, right? And don't get me wrong, I had a point where I had 30 listings at a time, but that's not this market anymore. I don't see the value in having hundreds of signs or dozens of signs when listen, have 3 signs to start, right? Fine, you can have a few $100s worth of signs, one time. Everything else is a monthly cost, right? A few $100s for the signs and a few $100s for the lock boxes, right? And that's it. And you're good to go, right? For $1,000 first month, and then every month going after that is probably maybe $200-300 at most, right? So very little, probably $5 grand a year. You can run your real estate business essentially, basically on a needs basis of the actual things you will need. So It's very, very important to understand that if you want to grow massively, right? If you want to grow massively, at the very beginning of your career, it's going to mean cutting back on a lot of expenses. So if you specifically would like to fail in real estate, spend a lot of unnecessary money as fast as possible. That's a guarantee to fail. So the next item on our list in a for sure way to fail in the real estate business is to get burnt out. Get burnt out, no problem, you're gonna fail in no time, right? So the way you can avoid burnout is understanding that like you're not gonna work 100 hours a week every single week and be able to sustain. Like the intention here is to, if you can work a solid 30 to 50, right, somewhere in that range, especially if you have not made your first 250, 300,000 yet, you're gonna have to probably work maybe 50 or 60 hours a week, probably for the next few years until you're making somewhere in the realm of 250 to 500 a year, where you could probably start slowing it down to maybe around 40 hours or 35. And then as you make more money, you can start slowing down slightly as long as certain metrics are being met. My intention here is not to tell you to work 100 hours a week. I did that, and in 36 months, if it was making $1 million a year, right, I decided to do that, right? Because I was like a freak of nature, and I wanted to be rich no matter what, right? Now, again, I don't work 100 hours a week anymore, but I had to put in my time. You're gonna have to put in your time. So a for sure fire way to get burnt out is to just literally don't get a lot of sleep, don't exercise, don't eat right, do all the wrong things when it comes to your nutrition, right? Do all these things perfectly, and you're guaranteed to burn out. Wonderful. You'll absolutely fail this year, because when you burn out, you're gonna wanna quit, and you're not gonna do the other tasks that are necessary in order for you to succeed. So the next item on the list of a way to fail is you don't hire soon enough. Now, for those of you who are making somewhere between 80 and 150,000 per year, if you do not have an assistant, which I'm not saying to be full-time, I still pay on a per transaction basis. That's how I've negotiated my deal. You know, my team's amazing. The women that work with me are absolutely fantastic. However, they're paid on per transaction. So you don't have to have a full-time individual. I had 11 full-time people. You don't need to have that, right? Like you don't need to have 11 full-time employees. I think that's absolutely stupid. And if I can go back and change anything, that would be my first thing that I would change about my business, is I wouldn't have hired so many people on a full-time basis. Everyone would either be on 100% commission, or they would be on a per transaction basis, and that's it. And I would have just had a lot less staff. I think it's really important. But however, if you're between 80 and 150 grand and you have yet to hire your first assistant on a per transaction basis, you're above 80 grand and you don't have at least a part-time assistant on a per transaction basis, hire somebody for God's sakes, because then it's going to lead to burnout. Because that means you're doing all the work, all the paperwork, all the work for the certificate of occupancies, all the all these other little paperwork things that you should be delegating. Because the only way to grow is to hire, is to delegate. So if you really want to make sure that not only do you burn out, but that you fail in 2023, just keep trying to do everything yourself. Don't delegate. Just try to do everything 100% yourself, and you'll be perfect, right? You'll be guaranteeing yourself to fail. And the other side of the coin, again, is to overhire, right? If you overhire, right, which means that you have three full-time employees and you're making only 150 grand a year, that's stupid, because you're spending way too much money for the type of business that you have. And as somebody like myself, right, I'm telling you, like I have like a 90, I just checking my margins now. I have like a 90+% margin these days. I'm like, 90%, that's pretty awesome. I'm like, yeah, that's great. And it costs all my expenses. And I spend quite a bit of money on my business, right? But I have a 90% margin, which is fantastic. Now, again, some months it's like 78, and most months it's somewhere between 80 and 90, 95, right? Like sometimes it's 95 when I have really high profit months, or really high gross revenue months, right? So it's just like those types of months, it's fantastic. Now, again, this is also why I urge people to, increase your price points. You want to guarantee you fail? Sell really cheap houses, right? You want to guarantee the fail of this business? You sell really cheap houses and be really negotiable with your commissions. That's a guaranteed way for you to fail in 2023. All right, so the last two specific things, these are must-hear things. So number next is going to be, you don't reach out to your sphere of influence or your past clients. So if you want to guarantee yourself to fail in the years to come in the real estate business, make sure you don't reach out to your sphere of influence. Be a secret agent. Don't tell anybody about what you do, right? That's a guaranteed way to fail in 2023. And the other side of the coin is, if you've sold homes in previous years, just don't call them. Completely ignore them. Act like you never sold them anything. Act like you don't even know who they are, and just keep trying to go for new business, because you are leaving so much money on the table. It's like you're bound to just fail out of this business, because you would honestly be able to pick up tens of thousands of dollars in found commissions by just building relationships with your sphere of influence, or deepening those relationships and making sure they know how to refer you, right? And asking for referrals, as well as deepening those relationships with your past clients and making sure to reach out to them on a consistent basis. It's like a guaranteed way to make money, but if you want to make sure you fail in 2023, make sure you just ignore all of them. All right, the last one, in which I think is probably the biggest driver, is about your mindset, which is most realtors don't think big enough, right? That's just a big problem, honestly, in the real estate business, is that they just assume that they're going to sell more properties this year, right? It's just an assumption. Well, I'm going to obviously make more money this year than I did last year, right? I don't need to set goals. I don't need to have a business plan. I don't need a coach. I'm just going to wing it all by myself and no problem. I'm going to guarantee that I'm going to make more money, right? Like, if you do not plan, right? If you fail to plan, that you're planning to fail, like, then guess what? You're guaranteeing yourself you're going to fail in 2023. Hiring a coach, right? I don't care who it is, hire a coach, right? Like, I have several coaches and I pay thousands of dollars a month for mentorship. I think it's incredibly important, because if I want to make, my goal is to make $10 million this year, and I don't have somebody in my life who's ever made $10 million, someone advising me, the odds of me making that money is slim to none. However, when I have 4 mentors right now who make more than 10 million per year, who are constantly guiding me and like showing me like things that I need to be looking out for and like things I need to be paying attention to, and really helping me adjust my business to make sure I can achieve my goals, it's almost a guarantee I'm gonna hit it eventually, right? Instead of just winging it, I have almost a guarantee to achieve it, right? It's worth every dollar, right? If I can, 4 to 5x my income, that's worth a lot of money, guys, right? Like, I'll spend a couple thousand to tens of thousands of dollars to 4 or 5x my income. So if you love this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up or a like. We really do appreciate it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 2,000, and I would really appreciate you guys. It means the world to me to have your support, and I'd love for you guys to help us out. It means the world. And again, if you have any questions, make sure you put it in the comment section down below. I answer every single question you might have, so make sure you do that. Other than that, guys, I love you so very much. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.